Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 693, and today is October 18th, 2024. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anslone. Not going to have a ton of news on today's show, although a couple of top stories that I think are very important that we get into. So be sure to share today's show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute. I repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com. It's the video version gets posted at YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee, so be sure to subscribe to the show there. Also, if you're using social media, I think sometimes it's helpful to share the video version of the show. And of course, it is up anywhere you could listen to audio podcasts. So, if you're a commuter or something like that, you'd like to listen on your way home to and from work, definitely subscribe to it on your favorite podcatcher. And then, of course, you can follow me on Twitter at @KyleAnslone_, where I post all the articles I write and a lot of other stuff, including this show. All right, so let's get into the news today. I think this here has potential to have just absolutely massive consequences. So this is a statement that Zelensky made on Thursday, and he says he either needs NATO membership or nuclear weapons. So Dave DeCamp wrote this one up for antiwar.com. Ukrainian President Zelensky said on Thursday that Ukraine either needs to join NATO or obtain nuclear weapons, marking the first time since the Russian invasion that he suggested Ukraine should get nukes. Zelensky made the comments while addressing the European Union's European Council in Brussels, saying he made the argument in a recent conversation with former President Donald Trump. So Zelensky said, in a conversation with Donald Trump, I said, this is our situation. What way do we have? Either Ukraine will have nuclear weapons, which for us will be a defense, or we will need to have some sort of alliance besides NATO, but today we know no other alliance. NATO countries today are not at war, NATO countries are not fighting, in NATO countries people are still alive. Thank God, that is just why we chose NATO, not nuclear weapons. And Donald Trump heard that from me. He said, you have a just argument. Now, that seems like the kind of thing that Donald Trump might say to someone when he didn't want to directly disagree with Zelensky, but also wasn't really affirming he wanted Zelensky to leave thinking it was an affirmation without it actually being an affirmation. So I think it was just Trump blowing a little bit of smoke and Zelensky buying it. So later at a press conference with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, Zelensky downplayed his comments, saying, we never spoke about that we are preparing to create nuclear weapons or something like that. My guess is that behind the scenes, somebody had explained to him how significant those comments are and that this could have been a real problem. So in his address to the European Council, Zelensky referred to the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, under which Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan agreed to remove all Soviet nuclear weapons from their territory in exchange for security guarantees from the US, UK, and Russia. While the nuclear weapons were on Ukraine's territory, they were still under Moscow's control following the dissolution of the Soviet Union. So Zelensky said, which nuclear state suffered? None except Ukraine. Who gave up their nuclear weapons? All of them. No, only Ukraine. Who is fighting today? Ukraine, Zelensky said. Now, look, I mean, I'm not saying Zelensky has no point here that maybe Ukraine had found some way to hold on to those nuclear weapons. Now, that may have been a lot more difficult than a lot of people make it sound for Kiev, and maybe it would have been too expensive, and they would have essentially had to have given up the nuclear program at some point over, the succeeding years anyways. However, if they were able to hold on to those nuclear weapons, that would have maybe presented a deterrent that prevented Russia from attacking. At the same time, maybe it wouldn't have. Now, the reality is Ukraine doesn't have those nuclear weapons, and just a few days before Russia's invasion of Ukraine on February of 24th of 2022, Zelensky said that if constitutions with signatories to the Budapest Memorandum didn't result in any concrete security guarantees, then the agreement would be in doubt. Russia took the comments to build a threat to build nuclear weapons, and that's the way it was interpreted. And so it's important to remember that Zelensky is just saying that because we didn't get any guarantees from the signatories of the Budapest Memorandum, that's again the US, UK, and Russia, then we could abandon that. And that's all about Ukraine giving up its nuclear weapons. And so abandoning that suggests that Ukraine is then looking to build nuclear weapons. And Putin made a big deal about this when he talked about the reason he ordered what the Kremlin calls the special military operation, which it's just a ground invasion of Ukraine. Now, the war has definitely transformed into a far more serious form of warfare than the initial kind of limited assault by Russia. But, it's pretty clear that the nuclear issue is a core one for Putin. So I don't know how the Kremlin responds to this, but I honestly wouldn't be surprised if this put a real target on Zelensky's back. Now, I know there's been speculation throughout this war that Russia has moved towards trying to decapitate the Ukrainian state. This is, I think, something that may push the Kremlin to take that angle. Now, at the very beginning of this war, I identified a real problem for Putin, and that was I think Zelensky is one of the more reasonable people who could come to power in Kiev that he could negotiate with. And if that's the case, if that everybody, who would replace Zelensky is more further to his right in a neo-Nazi, Ukrainian Nazi, well then how is Putin going to end this war? Because he needs to come to a deal with Kiev, and it probably has, it looks better if it's a Ukrainian government and not, Russia ransacked the capital and then stud some Ukrainian in the premier, but in reality, the leader of Ukraine was a Russian sock puppet. If he's going to come to an actual deal, then it would have almost had to have been with Zelensky. And so now that Zelensky's talking about making nuclear weapons, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of temptation in the Kremlin to go ahead and take this guy out. But again, to think that you're going to get somebody more reasonable seems unlikely. Now, might this provoke Russia? Maybe the more likely option would be to either take some Ukrainian nuclear facilities or anything, or maybe strike targets that Russia says that Ukraine could potentially make nuclear weapons. That would be my guess of the direction. Maybe stepped up strategic bombing, more hits to the capital of Kiev or something like that. Even willing to hit more civilian targets and things like that from Russia. I think these are all more likely options, but I do think this puts a real target on Zelensky's back. I don't think either of these options are likely either. So if Ukraine decides to make nuclear weapons, my guess is Russia is able to stop them before they get very close. And so it's like a threat that not only upsets Russia, but I also think upsets his Western backers. And so this wasn't a very smart move by Zelensky. Maybe he starts trying to walk it back over the next couple of days. But I think it shows Ukraine's desperation at this point in the war. So I think that story there is going to have major implications on the war in Ukraine and how things progress over the next particularly few weeks. I guess the only other thing I will say from the Russian perspective is I do think that Moscow has been kind of waiting to see how the US elections go, understanding that there's going to be a difference in the ability to negotiate with Trump versus Kamala Harris. I don't think he's going to have an easy time negotiating with Trump. I don't think that, Trump really just wants to end this war and he's going to come to some kind of realistic deal and rebalance the European security situation in a way where we could have a lasting peace in Eastern Europe. I don't think that's likely. I don't think Trump goes and re-enters the nuclear arms control agreements that he vacated. And so there's a lot of barriers to Trump being able to get a deal done with the Russians. However, it seems absolutely impossible, a non-starter, if Kamala Harris gets elected as president. Like, it's essentially their policy to support Ukraine as much as it takes for as long as it takes. And I don't see any point where she would encourage the Ukrainians to negotiate or be willing to negotiate with Russia directly, which is probably needed to end this conflict. All right, next up here, shifting over to the Middle East, but still a story about Russia. Russia warns Israel not to attack Iran's nuclear facilities. So on Thursday, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov strongly warned Israel against attacking Iran's nuclear facilities. And I've read this analysis from people who really study the Kremlin. If Sergei Rabkov, the deputy foreign minister, is delivering a statement, this is usually a little bit more bold and a little bit more threatening versus Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who, when he issues a statement, I think it really reflects concrete Russian policy. So I'm not sure if this is a real threat in that Russia would do a whole lot if Israel went ahead and attacked Iranian nuclear facilities. But, I think Russia is publicly signaling their displeasure with Israel, which is significant. So Rabkov said, according to the Russian news agency TASS, we have repeatedly warned and continue to warn and caution Israel against even hypothetically considering the possibility of an attack on Iran's nuclear facilities and nuclear infrastructure. This would be a catastrophic development and a complete rejection of the existing postulates in the sphere of nuclear security. So the warning of Russia comes amid an anticipation of an Israeli attack on Iran in response to the nearly 200 Iranian ballistic missiles that were fired at Israeli territory on October 1st. The Iranian attack was a response to a string of Israeli assassinations in the region, including the killing of Hamas political chief Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. There have been calls in Israel and the U.S. for Israel to attack Iran's nuclear program, even though there is no evidence Tehran is seeking to a nuclear weapon, which was recently acknowledged by the CIA. Now, you would think one of the things that could maybe change the Iranian policy would be an Israeli attack on their nuclear facilities. Maybe then they would go ahead and try to break out and make a weapon. So according to media reports, Israel has told the U.S. that it would strike military targets, not oil or nuclear infrastructure. However, in response to one of those reports, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office said, "We listen to the opinions of the United States, but we will make our final decision based on our own national interest." ABC News and CNN both reported on Wednesday that Netanyahu has approved targets to hit inside Israel, but their sources did not share any details. Israel is expected to launch the attack before the U.S. presidential election on November 5th, but the exact timeline is unclear. I guess, this weekend is looking likely. I would have thought, we talked about on the show that I thought was likely to come before now, and so it's interesting. I am expecting it to come on Friday or Saturday maybe, but we will see what happens, and maybe if Russia gets whiff that Israel's trying to do this, or maybe in reaction to Israel trying to strike an Iranian nuclear facility, we could maybe see additional Russian air defense systems deployed to Iran. All right, next up here, Israel says Hamas leader Sinwar has been killed. So the Israeli military and the Shin Bet security agency sent a joint statement on Thursday that they confirmed that Hamas leader Sinwar was killed by the Israeli military in southern Gaza city of Rafah. The statement reads, "A force of the 828th Brigade, which operated in the area, identified and eliminated 3 terrorists. After completing the process of identifying the body, it can now be confirmed that Sinwar was eliminated." President Biden released a statement celebrating the killing that said the DNA test confirmed that Sinwar was dead. He said, "Shortly after the October 7th massacres, I directed special operations personnel and our intelligence professionals to work side by side with their Israeli counterparts to help locate and track Sinwar and other Hamas leadership hiding in Gaza." Vice President Kamala Harris gave a brief address on Sinwar's killing, saying that over the past year, American special operators and intelligence personnel have worked closely with their Israeli counterparts to locate and track Sinwar and other Hamas leaders, and I commend their work. While Biden and Harris touted U.S. intelligence support for Israel, the operation that killed Sinwar appears to have been by chance. Israeli officials told the Wall Street Journal that the tank unit looking for the tunnels in Rafah spotted Hamas militants in an empty building and fired on them. They didn't realize one of them was Sinwar until they found his body. Netanyahu said Israel settled its accounts with Sinwar, who is believed to be the mastermind behind the October 7th attack on southern Israel, and also said that our war has not yet ended. So later in the day, Biden spoke with Netanyahu, and according to a White House readout of the call, the two leaders discussed how to use this moment to bring the hostages home and to bring the war to a close, with Israel's security assured and Hamas never again able to control Gaza. Sinwar's killing came after Israeli media reports said that the Israeli government is not interested in restoring hostage and ceasefire talks with Hamas and instead looking to annex portions of the Gaza Strip. Israeli forces are currently carrying out the beginning of the ethnic cleansing campaign in northern Gaza. So far, there has been no official confirmation from Hamas that Sinwar is dead. I saw a statement this morning that looked like it might have come from Hamas, but I still am not sure. So over the weekend, that will probably come out. My assumption is that he's actually dead. Now, I want to get into a little bit more of this because Israel released a video from a drone that records the final, I guess, like 2 minutes of Sinwar's life. And it shows him not hiding behind civilians, no civilians present whatsoever. He looks like he has been in a battle. Looks like he either doesn't have a hand or the lower half of his, I guess, right forearm is completely blown off. And there's this Israeli drone that's, flying close. And, you can't tell who it is. His face is covered. And the drone comes close and he throws a stick at it. And according to reports, he threw a couple grenades and there was a battle with the tank and Israeli soldiers before they finally fired a second tank shell that killed him. And it wasn't like this was a targeted raid to take out Sinwar. It wasn't like he was highly guarded. Apparently, he just had 2 bodyguards with him. So to the Palestinians, I think, and I would guess to many of the Hamas fighters, this would probably be something that is they're going to rally behind. This is their commander fighting till his very last moment. He didn't, they've been speculating for months that, he's living comfortably in underground bunkers surrounded by the Israeli hostages to ensure that Israel will not take him out because, they have all these hostages down here with Sinwar and he's using human shields. And it doesn't appear, at least from that video, that any of that is true. And I mean, I'm shocked. If I were Netanyahu, I think I would have personally deleted the footage of that drone took, because it seems like it's going to be something that anybody who wants to take up arms against Israel and resist what Israel is doing in Gaza or the West Bank or Lebanon or Syria or Iraq or Yemen is going to find a lot of cause to do so. And I read this morning that 2 militants entered the West Bank from Jordan and killed, or at least injured, 2 Israeli soldiers. And so I'm not sure if that's a reaction to what happened to the Sinwar killing, and I'm not trying to glorify this guy or his death in any way. I'm just letting you know that this is the way that video is going to be viewed, because he didn't die the way they said he would die, cowardly and surrounded. That just wasn't the case. All right, next up here, Israeli strike on Gaza school kills 28, including 5 children. So Israeli forces targeted another school turned shelter for displaced Palestinians in northern Gaza on Thursday, killing 28, including at least 5 children, and wounding 160. The strike targeted the Abu Hassan Elementary School in the Jabalia refugee camp, which has been under total siege for about 2 weeks, a step Israel has taken to carry out an ethnic cleansing plan in northern Gaza. So A Palestinian health official told Al Jazeera, "There was no water to extinguish the fire. There is nothing. This is a massacre. Civilians and children are being killed, burned under the fire." Israel claimed that it was targeting Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad fighters who gathered at the school. Israel typically claims the schools that it targets are Hamas command and control centers, but it never offers any evidence to back up that claim. And look, you just saw the Hamas leader killed, but he wasn't in the UN-run school or hiding behind civilians in the command and control center. So do these command and control centers even exist? I mean, that's a real question to ask here. Israel has said they've hit dozens, scores, hundreds of them at this point. Who knows? Thousands, at least tens of thousands of civilians have been killed in these massacres. So, I wish somebody would be able to ask those questions, but, unfortunately, Washington is Israel's main backer, and they just cover for all of Israel's crimes. So Hamas denied it was using the school, which was run by the United Nations Palestinian Relief Agency, for military purposes. Hamas claims that called Israeli claims nothing but lies, adding it's a systematic policy of the enemy to justify its crime. Oh, and one more thing about Sinwar's death. The Israelis had reported they found the ID of a man who was employed by UNRWA as a teacher who died alongside Sinwar, and UNRWA has confirmed that the ID that they found was a man who's currently alive and living in Egypt. So obviously, not with Sinwar. His ID must have just gotten left somewhere, and that's where Sinwar was when he died. More of a coincidence than anything else. Additionally, I don't think Sinwar's death is likely to make a major impact on Hamas's ability to operate. They'll probably regroup it and pretty quickly be able to fight. These groups are very decentralized and very prepared to lose their leadership and ready to adjust to it when it happens. I mean, you never know. Sometimes, these kinds of things, these decapitation strikes do make a difference, but in the past, it has not hurt Hamas. All right, next up here. 5 Israeli soldiers killed, 2 tanks destroyed in southern Lebanon fighting. So fighting seems to be picking up in southern Lebanon as Israeli forces are reportedly encountering quite a bit of resistance to the ongoing invasion, with substantial battles reported taking place in the Ramira area, where at least 5 Israeli troops were killed and a number of others wounded, 3 of them seriously so. And I think this goes to the point I was just making about Sinwar and Hamas. If you look at Hezbollah, they've lost Nasrallah and the rest of most of their upper level leadership over the past year, and yet they're still putting up this stiff resistance. So earlier in the day, there were a pair of incidents in southern Lebanon, which is just across the in Israel, which is just across the border from southern Lebanon, where 2 Israeli tanks were hit as they were crossing into the area and destroyed by Hezbollah anti-tank missiles. The Israeli battle tank has repeatedly been active in the ongoing invasion in southern Lebanon. The tanks were involved in an Israeli raid on UN peacekeeper bases near Ramira over the weekend. So Hezbollah has made extensive use of anti-tank missiles, both in the ongoing fighting and in previous exchanges of fire into northern Israel over the past year. Hezbollah is reporting substantial rocket strikes at Israeli border sites and troop gatherings near the border area. Hezbollah and Israel have been trading fire since early October of 2023, and it has escalated into an invasion, which Israel announced last month. The attacks have increased a lot since then, with massive casualties and huge numbers of Lebanese displaced fleeing into Syria, although Israel has bombed those roads, making it much harder for people to get out when they're displaced. Hezbollah's Prime Minister Hassan Fahalada bragged during a press conference that Hezbollah forces continue to resist the invasion in all areas, and said that Israeli troops have not captured a single village anywhere yet in Lebanese territory. And if true, that is a a rather notable battlefield success for Hezbollah there. And again, goes to show that these decapitation strikes don't seem to make a big deal. All right, that's where I'm going to wrap up the show for today. The town is using some really large equipment outside my window right now. So if you guys have heard any banging around over the last 5 minutes, or I've been kind of looking away, it's because they are removing this massive tree that they cut down that was hanging over the road. So wrapping up the show there. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We'll be back with more shows next week, and hopefully without any interruptions.